Have you ever opened a beauty product and thought, is that it? Why is it half empty? Maybe it was like one of those big heavy jars of eye cream, but had like barely an inch of product inside. Or one of those lip glosses that look half empty when you actually remove the applicator. Or one of those big chunky bottles that's hiding a smaller container inside. I feel like we've all been there and been extremely disappointed when we notice that maybe there isn't as much product in the packaging as we thought we were. And it probably made you feel like you were being ripped off. And I don't blame you. I felt that too, especially with lip balms. But today I want to dig into why brands do this. Are they trying to trick you so they can increase profits? Or is there a genuine reason as to why this happens? But I'm not doing this alone. I will have the help of Allison Turquoise, a beauty packaging and sustainability consultant with years of experience helping brands improve their packaging. She has some great content I highly recommend you go and watch if you have any questions about packaging. The refill packaging scam, I've learned so much from her. So she'll be answering some of your questions, some of my questions, as well as discussing when this crosses the line into outright deception, some of the lawsuits that keep popping up as a result of this, and why these lawsuits are so hard for consumers to win. Okay, so the first thing you need to know is that there is a name for this practice of underfilling packaging on purpose, and it's called slack fill. But there are also different types of slack fill. So before we get into any of the deceptive tactics and resulting lawsuits, we should probably talk about what slack fill is exactly, as well as how and why it's used in the world of beauty. But I'll let the expert Allison explain this for you. Okay, so let's get into it. I just mentioned to you off recording that I feel like this is just part of packaging and making a product, right? Slack fill, is that the right term?
Mm-hmm.
It is. Okay, perfect. I feel like this is pretty standard, but if you can just run us through what exactly slack fill is, how common it is, and kind of, is it really a necessity?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to talk through that. Yeah. So essentially, slack is the internal space between the actual product formula and then the packaging itself. So oftentimes you have slack when you initially fill a bottle or a jar sometimes. There's always going to be a certain amount of overhead that's required. Nothing is ever going to be filled 100% to the brim of a bottle or a jar.
So just to confirm, slack fill is the difference between the total capacity of the product container and the actual volume of the product inside it. In other words, it's the empty space you see when you open a moisturizer or a serum and realize it's not quite as full as you thought it would be. Sometimes that space is there on purpose and it's there for a good reason, but that's not always the case. In the US, slack fill is generally discussed under two categories: functional and non-functional slack fill. Now, functional slack fill is allowed as it actually serves a real purpose. It's there for a good reason, not just because a brand is trying to scam you or trick you. And here's Allison to explain functional slack fill for you in a little more detail. I've written something down here that I wrote this so long ago that I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't know what I mean anymore. I'm usually like a month ahead with my videos at most of the time. So I had this idea ages ago and wrote down these notes ages ago. And I wrote here functional slack fill exceptions. Which of these exceptions do you see the most often in cosmetics? Protection during shipping, machinery filling requirements, settling air in whipped creams, mousses, and skincare. Does that mean anything to you?
I think I understand. Yeah, you're like, yes. No. I think I understand what you're getting at. Yeah. So functional headspace is very much a real thing, and different formulas and different packs will require different functional headspace and slack. So for example, like aerosols, we talked about aerosols, there's a liquid in there that's then turned into a mousse or a whipped formula. And that requires a certain amount of headspace to properly dispense. If you have a bottle with a dip tube pump that's in there, there's a certain amount of slack and headspace that needs to be, allocated for in order to account for that dip tube formula displacement once it's inserted. So, it really does vary by formula and by package. But there's definitely, varying levels of functional slack and headspace that are required, just depending on the product and package.
Does temperature affect fill levels? Do products expand or shrink enough for that to be considered?
Yes. So yeah,
Oh,
that's a great question. Yeah, and that's something that's often overlooked. But yes, formula fill can fluctuate, especially when it's exposed to different temperatures, because some formulas will kind of expand and contract depending on the conditions. So that is something that definitely happens. I mean, it's usually not extreme in most cases. But I mean, if you're working with like a small fill size, a small amount of, contraction by the formula can visually be noticeable. But yeah, it's not usually enough for people to notice. But it can be. I've had a couple instances in which it was noticeable and it was something that the brand was trying to work through.
yeah. But it's not something that they need to like half fill a lip balm tube for, or like half fill, like, so like to the naked eye, the consumer probably wouldn't even notice
Yeah,
much.
in my experience, it's not that extreme. There may be a few unique cases, but in my experience, I haven't had one that's so like startling and extreme as,
Yeah.
fluctuating from like a 10 mil to a 5 mil.
Yeah. Are there functional reasons as to why you touched on a few, but for example, Rhode lip balm, I feel like really faced some negative feedback the last
Mm,
couple of years because people were squeezing the tube and they're like, it's half full, like there's nothing in there. But I
mhm.
feel like it's meant to have some air in, right? So what
Yeah.
are the like main functional reasons why there's going to be less product in such a big bit of packaging or like, whatever kind of size packaging?
Sure. Yeah. So when it comes to tubes in particular, you always are going to have headspace in tubes. Otherwise, when you go to seal it, once you apply any pressure, it'll literally explode. The product will just like burst the hole through the top and the seal, and it just doesn't seal properly. So there's always a certain amount of headspace that's needed. One thing that's interesting though about tubes is, and this is getting kind of technical, so hopefully there's like a lot of diehard packaging nerds on here. But when it comes to tubes have standard diameters. Diameters being, obviously if you look at the cap, or, if you have the cap removed, there's a specific diameter and it's usually industry standard and there's a huge range.
Mm.
However, within one specific diameter, you can have it filled to varying levels of fullness. So a lot of times, you can have a small diameter tube. Let's say it's like a 16 millimeter. It's quite small. But you can have that filled and this is just an example, you can have it filled from like 20 mil to 40 mil. And either one is really compatible with that tube from, a sealing and crimping perspective, but you're going to have a significantly different amount of headspace involved. So some
Mm.
brands also take advantage of that as well. So if
Oh.
they want to create a larger size impression, instead of doing a wider diameter to better accommodate a larger fill, sometimes they'll just increase tube height, even though they really don't need it. They could have gone one diameter down for tubes, and it really would have probably been, a better fit as far as like product formula ratio to headspace. But again,
Yeah.
like taller tube impression, it makes you feel like you're getting more product, even though once you actually start to feel it, you're like, this is a lot of air in here.
It feels like a scam. It feels like you've just been diddled a little bit. It's so
Yes.
weird. So as we've seen, there are quite a few things that can count as functional slack fill. A lot of the time it's actually necessary so that the products can be properly sealed afterwards. Sometimes space is left to compensate for how products might react to changing temperatures, or because manufacturers have to account for the displacement of product when an applicator is inserted. Functional slack fill can also be necessary because packaging machinery just can't fill a container all the way to the top. Especially with thicker products like creams, gels, or paste, a lot of automated filling systems, they kind of like need some space at the top so they don't jam the machinery, spill over, or produce inconsistent fills. Or it could be down to settling too, like during shipping, storage, and handling, products can shift or compress inside a container. A face cream that looked completely full when it left the factory might look significantly lower by the time it hits the store shelf. That doesn't necessarily mean it's underfilled. It's just gravity. Another acceptable excuse for functional slack fill is design. If the container is meant to be decorative or a necessary part of the presentation of the product, then it can include slack fill as long as the larger packaging adds a significant amount of value to the products, such as if it's meant to be a gift or if it's a reusable container. And for particularly small products, slack fill can sometimes be considered functional if the brand needs to increase the size of the packaging so that that they have enough space to legibly provide all the mandatory or necessary labeling information required. Now, if a brand can show that their products include slack fill for any of the reasons above that I've just mentioned, it is considered functional slack fill. But if they haven't used it for any of those legitimate reasons, then it would be considered non-functional slack fill. This is the kind of underfilling that really does annoy customers because there's no reason for it. And it usually seems pretty obvious that the brand is deliberately trying to trick you. But even though it often seems obvious to consumers that brands are being deceptive with the way they fill their products, unfortunately, the line between functional and non-functional slack fill can get quite blurry. And this means that there are always brands willing to push the limits of what they can actually get away with, even if it does open them up to potential lawsuits. So the question here is, if underfilling a product on purpose could open brands up to potential lawsuits, why do they do it? Why take the risk? Now, it may seem like the answer is obvious because they want to maximize profits by charging you more for less product. But it actually may be a little bit more complicated than that. Although the reason behind it does seem to mostly come back to money, unsurprisingly, here's what Allison had to say about it.
When brands do this on purpose, is it because it's going to save them money? And how much money would it really save them? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's the... Why? Why deceive?
It's an interesting question regarding saving money. So like on the formula side, yes, if they're underfilling, it'll save them money on formula. But if they're underfilling significantly, they could also potentially save money on just getting a smaller component that actually fits the formula. Yeah.
Because I'd be like, the packaging looks smaller, for example, a lip balm, but it feels like there's more product in it. I feel like I'd be more likely to buy that product that feels like it's less air. Do you know what I mean? And even if it was in a smaller, I don't know.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I have looked at lip glosses and balms in particular because every brand on earth is launching them. Can we put a pause on that? This is like a quick plug. Please, no more product.
Yes, please stop. We're done now. We've all got the same 4 colors that they're all launching. We're fine. We're good for that.
But you know, across like lip balms and lip glosses, particularly in tubes, it's very interesting. I have noticed that some brands, to your point, they put minimal headspace, just the minimal functional headspace, but consumers, even if it's the same fill size, and even if it's something that's, you know, obviously clearly printed, it does not click for many consumers. Not all, some consumers are very astute when it comes to reading fill size and are quite skeptical. And I think there's actually an increase in skeptical consumers just given some of the lawsuits and scandals that we've had here and there in the industry. But I would say by and large, most consumers still aren't comparing the value on a net weight basis between competing products. They're still relying on just general size impression. So it makes it just really challenging for, you know, brands that are trying to, you know, reduce, you know, the perceived, you know, possibility of deceptive packaging, but also like the amount of material they're using per package. From a sustainability perspective, you know, oversized packaging is like one of my pet peeves because it's just completely non-functional material use purely for, you know, deceptive purposes. So yeah, you know, it's really tricky. Unfortunately, since a lot of brands are being used as benchmarks for other brands developing similar products. Unfortunately, I would say, you know, excessive headspace or oversized packaging is something we're going to continue to see.
Is there a particular product that you would look at and be like, there's absolutely no reason for slack fill? Like these, what metal's this? Aluminium?
An aluminum tube.
Aluminum, as the Americans say. So there's no need for slack fill in aluminum tubes, for example, is there?
Well, you do need a little bit of slack.
A little bit, okay. Because whenever I open them, shit just comes out, like it's starts pouring out.
It oozes out. And you're like, oh, we didn't need that much yet.
Yeah.
But yes, no, to your point, there's absolutely, you know, slack that is truly non-functional, completely unnecessary. I would see this most often with opaque bottles. It's much easier to hide in opaque bottles because you can't see it. You know, with jars, obviously, you know, you take the cap off and you can visually see the relationship between the product formula and then the actual inner well that houses it. And, you know, obviously brands are a lot more cognizant that it shouldn't be that drastic of a difference. Same with, bottles with dip to pumps that are, completely clear. Again, you can visually see it. So brands are a lot more intentional. I would say opaque bottles is where it gets a little bit trickier because consumers truly cannot see. Some really savvy consumers may try to like feel where the bulk of the formula weight is in their hand, like in relation to the headspace, but like, you're making a lot of assumptions there. So I would say opaque bottles is where it's more likely to happen. I would say the most intentional taking advantage of slack or excess headspace is when brands choose to launch a product in oversized packaging. So oversized packaging is often used by brands to create the impression to consumers that you're getting more bang for your buck. Because oftentimes when consumers are purchasing products, a lot of consumers are not taking the time to actually read the fill weight, especially if they're in like a retail environment or if they're just quickly scrolling online. A lot of times they're really just assessing it based on size of the package, especially if they're comparing it to like competing products and brands. So a lot of brands do take advantage of this by using oversized packaging. So sometimes the outer package itself is what's actually oversized, but sometimes the inner well is actually oversized in comparison to the fill claim that they want to make. Especially for certain products like, serums, the standard's 30 mil, moisturizers, the standard's 50 mil. But if they find a 60 mil jar that creates this really like nice, like retail shelf presence and looks like you're getting a lot more value, they may still choose to move forward with that 60 mil jar, but just fill it to 50 mil. So there's definitely brands that can take advantage of that. I think especially with oversized packaging. But there's also other incidences that come up that we can get into more detail with, where sometimes it'll start out as a genuine mistake or oversight, but somewhere along the line, once brands figure out and find out through their fill testing that there's going to be an excess of headspace, sometimes then there's intentional deceit that comes into play. So it does depend.
Okay, because I was going to ask, because we see these headlines, I got written down here, Elf, Monday Haircare, Bare Minerals, all facing these class action lawsuits over underfilled packaging. So is your initial reaction, I feel like you kind of answered that already, industry norm or potentially a bit of a red flag? You kind of said that sometimes people do this. And but then like you said as well, sorry, going off on a tangent as well, as a consumer, I feel like I only know what 30 milliliters looks like because it is the average size of a serum. I kind of base it like the ordinary serums. So when I see any other serum, I'm like, yes, that is 30 milliliters. Milliliters, not milliliters. But then if you tell me this, like, what's this bottle? 240 milliliters. I don't know. I just don't know because I don't know what a milliliter looks like, I do it constantly with Amazon. Like I over order, like bulk mayonnaise. And so like one squeezy tube. So do you think like brands really do think that, like, oh, they're not going to know. Like, let's just make it look like they're not even going to look at the milliliter claim,
Yes. Yeah. Some brands genuinely are aware that consumers are not going to actually take the time to read the fill size. And also it's really difficult to compare apples to apples formula fill because different formulas, they have different textures, viscosity. Sometimes like if we're looking at like aerosols or foam, they will dispense completely differently than how they're actually housed in the vessel. So yes, some brands are aware of this and do take advantage of it. Again, others, I would say it's less intentional deceit, more it's a byproduct. I think as far as industry norm versus red flag, I think it's a little bit of both. I think one thing that's becoming all the more common is, behind the scenes, I partner with brands on their packaging, and oftentimes brands will sometimes say that they want to go with a slightly oversized package. And when we get into the thought process behind it, it's because, it's not really that we want to actively deceive consumers. It's that our main competing product is already in an oversized jar and we're losing sales. So now we all have to have oversized packaging to actually make it seem like we're competitive from a value perspective.
Sneaky. There have been times where I picked up a moisturizer, for example, and I must say it's usually Japanese beauty and Korean sometimes so for example, it will have like a moisturizer tub, and I don't realize if you flip it upside down, it's hollow. Then you have this little case under. Do you know what I mean? Like the packaging's like that, and there's a little case in there. I'm like, why have they done that? Because that seems intentionally deceitful. But when I look at it as a bit of packaging, I'm like, oh, that's nice. But then I feel like I'm getting less for my money. Does that mean I'm paying more for the extra plastic? Like, it seems so deceitful. Like, are those things, does that actually mean something? You know, like, am I paying more for less in a way?
Sure. Yeah. So what I believe you're referring to is a false bottom. So essentially, this
Yes.
happens with jars a lot in particular. I know. I think the Laneige mini lip masks went viral for this because they look like more for bang for your buck when you turn them over, like they're hollow.
Oh, it's like a
Um,
finger full, and then that's it. It's like, looks like a proper tub. Yeah, it's terrible.
exactly. Yes. There is no functional reason for that from a packaging perspective, other than to make it seem to consumers that they're getting more product than they actually are. So yeah, unfortunately, there's no functional reason for that. At least in the ones that I've seen, it is truly just for size impression.
No, this is a really stupid question. Sorry. So when it says the milliliter on the side, is that how much product is actually in it and not the volume that the container can hold? Does that make sense?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
right, okay.
No, that's a great question because sometimes, for example, when I'm sourcing packaging, oftentimes I have to take into consideration the final fill claim that we want to make for a product. And I've literally run into this issue where it's like, it was a fragrance roller ball, for example, and they really wanted a 10 mil fill claim because that's kind of standard. So we sourced a 10 mil roller ball. It was glass. It was perfect. Aesthetically, it worked out. Price wise, it was like in line with cost targets. But then once we actually did the fill test, it ended up being closer to 9 milliliters. And that just wasn't going to be competitive in that landscape. So that could be really challenging when it comes to sourcing packaging, is that, yes, there's usually packaging that's like a standard fill size because there are standard fill sizes across different product categories.
Right, yeah.
But depending on the viscosity and the texture of the formula, sometimes it won't meet that. And that's sometimes where brands are tempted to fudge the fill size a little bit.
Yeah, I kind of get it because part of me is like, I should really read the packaging. Like, I should look and see how much was in there. But then I also feel like that's what they want me to do. No, that's what they don't want me to do, don't they? They want me to look at the packaging and think, oh, that's really full.
They don't want us to read, basically.
They don't want us to read. Yeah. Oh, we're literate.
This is actually a question that comes up a lot when it comes to slack fill. Can it still be considered deceptive if the quantity is clearly labeled? Or does that label make it okay for brands to use non-functional slack fill? Now, lots of people have lots of different opinions on this, with brands obviously arguing that they've done what they're legally required to do. They've told you the exact amount of product you're getting, and it's up to the consumer to read and understand that before making a purchase. But consumers generally seem to feel like regardless of whether the net volume or weight is clearly labeled, brands are still actively deceiving them by using larger packaging because they know that most consumers aren't looking closely at the weight when making a decision. I don't do that. I don't pick up a product and look at it and be like, oh my God, how many milliliters is this exactly? Then compare it to the packaging. I don't fucking know. I only know what 30 milliliters is because it is the standard serum size. That's literally it when it comes to measurements. Oh, I know what a meter is as well. You just see a bigger container and assume you're getting more, right? I do that. We all know that brands research consumers' buying habits all the time. They know that consumers often aren't making a decision based on the amount on the label, but instead look at the feel and the size of the packaging, so they know exactly what they're doing when they make their packaging larger or otherwise make it look like it contains more product than it actually does. They know what they're doing. And according to Allison as well, this is something you can regularly see brands doing, especially when they start selling in retail stores.
So you mentioned that brands are kind of doing the same thing to keep up with other brands who are basically, making their packaging look bigger intentionally. Is this related in any way to when they start selling on shelves? Does that make sense? Like, is it once they hit retail, is there a reason why they might choose to then start creating bigger packaging or packaging that looks nicer or changing their packaging? Is that at all a factor in the amount of slack fill? You have to look up what that term is.
Yes, yeah, no, that's absolutely a consideration. Sometimes retail teams, when a brand's entering into a retail distributor or they're launching a new product, sometimes there's a certain shelf presence that the retail team wants, especially because online it's harder to compare with competing products, the size of the package and therefore the implied value. But on shelf, it's incredibly easy to pick two products up that are competing and just quickly and subliminally ascertain which one is going to give you more bang for your buck based on the size of the packaging, whether or not that's actually true. So yes, it's a huge consideration. Interestingly enough, retail actually, in my experience, is one of the leading causes as to why underfilling happens. And I can share some like anonymous examples, but so sometimes packaging is actually produced and printed before fill testing is complete. And this has happened on numerous occasions against, my advice and guidance, but, lead times being what they are, especially for brands in a retail distributor, there are huge financial consequences if you do not hit that launch date. So oftentimes brands, when timing is tight, and let's face it, it's always tight, they have to make executive decisions. And they also have to be very, I'm going to say, creative with lead time. So oftentimes when you're working towards a product launch, there's multiple lead times stacked on top of each other for different aspects of the product, one of them being packaging. So sometimes brands will choose to actually produce and print packaging, including the fill size, onto the package so that they can then ship it to the contract manufacturer while the contract manufacturer is still ordering raw materials and slotting them in for filling. But sometimes brands do that prior to fill testing actually being validated. So once fill testing is validated, sometimes it comes in under what they printed on the packaging. And that's a very big dilemma for brands because they have essentially two options. One, they can completely scrap all of the packaging and have it reproduced, which is usually going to be like a 5 to 6 figure loss, plus months of lead times down the drain, plus probably retailer chargebacks because they're going to miss their launch, or they can choose to rework it, which a lot of times if, a brand's filling in the US, if they have it reworked here as in like re-silk screened or like relabeled, it's a lot of work and it still does add to the lead time. And it also degrades the aesthetic experience for consumers of the package itself. So some brands have made the ill-advised decision to launch it as is, we'll fix it on the next launch. Like we just need to get this out of the door and into Sephora or into Ulta, or we're going to get chargebacks. So unfortunately, sometimes what starts as truly like an operational oversight and mistake then turns into a tough decision that then sometimes turns into intentional deceit.
Wow. Is that illegal?
Yes. Yes. It's absolutely illegal. Yes. Yeah.
So then these lawsuits could have some merit to them in a way, I guess, potentially.
Yes.
Well, that brings us on very, very nicely to some examples of prominent lawsuits regarding claims of non-functional slack fill by beauty brands. One of the most notable slack fill lawsuits we've seen recently, I think very, very recently actually, involves e.l.f. Cosmetics, who are accused in February of 2025 of violating a California state consumer law. Now, the suit claims here that e.l.f. Cosmetics deceptively sells its lip gloss and exfoliant products in oversized containers that do not reasonably inform consumers that they are up to half empty. The lawsuit also says that the company could have used smaller or transparent packaging, but it didn't, and that this design choice misleads buyers on purpose. The claims specifically refer to e.l.f.'s Holy Hydration Gentle Peeling Exfoliant and their glossy lip stain products. The lawsuit also says that the defendant e.l.f. dupes unsuspecting consumers across America to pay premium prices for empty space, and that the brand markets the products in a systematically misleading manner. They go on to say that the brand underfills the products to save money and to deceive consumers into purchasing the products over competitors' products. Slackfill. The plaintiff wants to make it a class action lawsuit, which would represent all California consumers who bought these products in the 4 years leading up to the filing of the lawsuit. e.l.f. obviously, of course, denies any wrongdoing, as any brand in this position would, but the case is still ongoing at the moment. Now, neither Allison or I are legal experts in any way, but I did speak to her about this e.l.f. lawsuit and her opinions, and she has some interesting thoughts on why consumers may have had an issue with these products in particular.
So when we look at this e.l.f. lawsuit, the lawsuit was brought to court because they're arguing that e.l.f. unlawfully underfills its holy hydration, gentle peeling exfoliant, and glossy lip stain products, resulting in large empty spaces. So when you look at, I think we've pretty much covered it, but when you look at a glossy lip stain, for example, let me see if I can get the picture up of one of them and share it with you.
That would be so helpful, yeah.
Because I feel like a glossy lip stain sounds like it's going to have the gap we all presume it does. I'll just get the picture up.
Just looking at this picture, one thing I'm just noting off the bat is this is a very oversized doe foot, and this is also a very short component. So within the component itself, there's going to need to be headspace for the doe foot applicator to be inserted, which, as we can see visually, takes up quite a bit of room. Additionally, we also have like a wiper insert, which you can't see here, but essentially it ensures that, you know, when you're actually pulling the lip stain applicator out, that it's properly, you know, wiping the edges of the rod so it doesn't become an oopy goopy mess over time. So considering how small and how short this is, I can see visually how once you actually take the doe foot applicator out, it probably looks half full, honestly.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. It looks like half applicator, half product. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. So I can definitely see why there would be skepticism around this. I cannot comment on, you know, whether there was, you know, any sort of intention to mislead consumers. To me, I would interpret this as really just being, you know, just a genuine kind of you know, relationship between the doe foot applicator, which is very large and stout, you know, in comparison to the actual formula fill. I actually have this component.
Oh,
so
dear.
Yeah. So when I, you know, brand new, once I actually take the applicator out, I mean, it does literally, like, the formula just breathes and goes,
yeah.
Like, it sits almost like at half level, it looks like. But yeah, I mean, that's the cost of having an oversized doe foot applicator.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, bearing in mind, I know nothing about packaging and barely any kind of like makeup or lip product, but looking at that and that little air bubble kind of thing that's in there, to me, as somebody who's seen a lot of like lip glosses, you know, the standard, you know, pull it out, you know, when people pump it, I hate when they pump it. But usually I expect like that much missing. Do you know what I mean? I always expect a good chunk at the top. So to me, that looks like there's a good amount in there. Before you mentioned it, I didn't consider how huge that doe foot is. That's massive. But when I look at that, I'm like, oh my God, that's like filled nearly to the top. Do you know what I mean? Like, in comparison to what I've seen on like shelves and online before. But yeah, I get like once you take that out, it's going to be like half full looking. But then I guess they would have clearly written how much product is in there on the packaging. So like, what you're going to do kind of thing.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things. But it's something that I encourage brands to take into consideration is the impression that consumers are going to have. I think consumers are increasingly skeptical of brands. There's a lot of mistrust. So, you know, if you feel like consumers might have a certain reaction to, you know, your fill, especially if you have a doe foot applicator like this, you know, it's something to take into consideration ahead of time before, you know, a certain online narrative takes hold. Again, I can't speak to the intentions behind e.l.f., but again, this would just be my interpretation based purely on looking at the packaging.
Yeah. So really you think like kind of brands and consumers have to meet somewhere in the middle as far as reading the packaging, but then also being, it's not purposely misled, but they know what they're doing. So I think, like you say, it's in the brand's favor to not even have the consumer feel like they're being misled in any way. You know, they want to trust the brand, but legally, we're not lawyers, but
yes. No, exactly. And like, for example, if I'd been like partnering with e.l.f. on this launch, one thing that would have been discussed was, okay, this is an oversized doe foot applicator. Could we potentially prioritize an applicator that's not so oversized so that we can get more fill, or so there's not as much headspace? Because especially for e.l.f. Cosmetics, where we know, even though they're beloved by so many people, they are very much geared towards budget conscious and value driven consumers. So of course, those consumers are going to be a lot more sensitive to the perception that they're not getting what they paid for.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Another even more recent similar case involves Monday Haircare, with a lawsuit being filed against the brand in July of 2025, claiming that some of their products contain significantly less product than you would expect them to. The plaintiff argues that even if consumers check the net weight of the product before buying, they would not reasonably expect the actual amount of shampoo to be significantly less than the size of the container, which I think is fair. Legally fair? I don't know. But I think that's, in general, all of us, right? The lawsuit specifically refers to Monday Haircare's Monday Moisture and Hyaluronic Acid Shampoo as products which have been unlawfully underfilled, and also alleges that the brand's packaging practices harm consumers and give the company an unfair advantage over competitors who accurately label their products. It claims that there is nothing on the front of these products that would reasonably inform consumers of the quantity of product provided relative to the size of the containers, such as like a fill line or indication that the inner lining of the container is smaller than the outer packaging. This lawsuit was also filed in California. California love a lawsuit, don't they? But that's really because they seem to have much clearer regulations on cosmetics than any other US state, and it also seeks to proceed as a class action lawsuit, representing again anyone in California who bought the products in the last 4 years. So like Elf, of course, Monday have denied any, what they call Monday Haircare, have denied any wrongdoing, but this case is also still ongoing at the moment and probably will be for a few years now. So we'll have to wait to see if anything comes from these lawsuits. But these are just a couple of more recent cases related to underfilling in the beauty industry, but these sort of claims aren't new. Consumers have been taking brands to court over this sort of thing for a very, very long time now. The trouble is that winning this kind of case seems to be very, very difficult. Just because lawsuits based on underfilling claims are on the rise, it doesn't mean that they are easy to win. There are some serious challenges when it comes to winning a slack fill lawsuit, and here's what Allison had to say about it.
There's so many different scenarios when it comes to underfilling, as we've just discussed. Everything from oversized packaging to just printing your packaging too early and then not having your fill testing validated yet. So there's a wide range of scenarios that could happen. I think, and I'm not a legal expert, this is just my experience working behind the scenes, but like proving the brand's intent is where things get really murky. I think it would be easy to say it was, an honest mistake. It was something that wasn't brought to the executive team's decision. Maybe it was something that, they claimed the contract manufacturer withheld from them regarding like actual validated fill size. There's so many ways that I'm sure brands can spin it. So I imagine like proving intent and the liability of that could be rather challenging. But there's a plethora of reasons that this can happen.
That seems to be the first big hurdle for consumers who try to sue brands over non-functional slack fill, just proving that the brand's intent to mislead in the first place. I feel like that functional or non-functional slack fill fine line is very, very thin. Even when it may seem obvious to a consumer that a brand is intentionally trying to mislead people into buying their products over a competitor's or to pay more for something you aren't getting as much of, proving that is legally so difficult. So difficult, especially when a brand can point to a long list of acceptable reasons for functional slack fill and try to claim they underfilled their products in order to protect the content because of machinery limitations, because of settling in transit, or any other acceptable reasons for slack fill. And if you can prove a brand specifically intended to mislead consumers, most cases fall apart anyway because a lot of courts rule that a reasonable consumer would read the label, see the net weight, and use that to make their own decision. But even if you manage to prove the brand's deceptive intent and get a judge that doesn't think a net weight label is enough, then you still have to try and prove what harm was done to you, as well as how much harm was done. You have to be able to work out accurately how much money you actually lost because of this deception, which is a lot more difficult than it sounds. Did the empty space actually inflate the price? Like, how would you know that? How much would it have cost if the packaging was smaller? What actually should the packaging have looked like? Like, you don't know these things. Would the consumer have bought from a cheaper competitor if the packaging was different? All those questions make slack fill cases so complex and incredibly difficult to win. Then there's the time and the money. People just don't have it. And that's why most slack fill lawsuits get thrown out. Very few settle quietly out of court, and even fewer end up with major payouts for the plaintiffs. The burden of proof is very high, the laws are complicated and confusing, and brands can easily point to that long list of functional slack fill exemptions. So even if Slack-fill lawsuits are becoming more common, I'm not sure that's going to have any significant impact on the practice anytime soon, or at least not until more people actually start winning these cases. Seeing as that looks pretty unlikely at the moment, I asked Allison if there are any changes or maybe packaging innovations in the world of beauty packaging that might put an end to unlawful underfilling, and if it's really as much of an issue as it sometimes seems.
Do you think, because we mentioned how it's technically illegal to like, you know, lie about what's on the packaging versus what actually is in there. Do you think this is enough of an issue for there to be a change in some form of, not regulation, but do brands need to start, I don't know, you know, when you say with opaque packaging, like putting a clear strip down the side with key little marks saying, you know, the level, how much is left. Is it enough of an issue to start introducing all these different changes, legalities, you know, things? Because, you know, you're saying it can happen, but is it really, in your experience, I know you can't speak for the whole industry, but is it really something that brands are doing to deceive? Is it that big an issue?
I would say it's definitely not commonplace. I mean, it happened. I've had experience with brands having this issue, but it's definitely not rampant in my experience. Could be also the brands I'm partnering with. So, you know, I think there could be merit in trying to increase the transparency around formula fill, but I think realistically, a lot of times it's going to come down to cost and adoptability. So like, for example, the example you just cited about having like a clear strip, that would be great from a transparency and formula visibility perspective, but that also increases the cost of goods from a decoration perspective.
Oh, it does? I thought it would be like less label.
Yeah,
One centimeter less label gets the money off, you know?
Yeah, no, so oftentimes, because, you know, if we're doing like a beautiful straight line, we're going to have to tape that off very precisely. And that would increase labor costs and decoration costs oftentimes. So there's a cost implication to it as well. So I imagine there would be quite a bit of resistance to that. And, you know, again, I'd say the majority of brands don't intentionally do this or do this at all. A lot of brands will actually choose to do like a full project timeline in the correct order and not trigger packaging production until filling has been like fully validated. And that's the way it should be. But I think a lot of brands are under a lot of stress, especially with retail distribution and the financial repercussions if they miss that date, that, you know, unfortunately it can lead to getting kind of sloppy in order to meet, you know, milestones and deadlines.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. With your vast knowledge, are there any particular innovations that has caught your attention that might help reduce slack fill in the future, keeping things aesthetically pleasing, keeping all the, you know, safety and required standards in place? Is there anything that you think is going to stop this, or is it something that needs to be stopped?
You know, at least from my perspective, I would say a lot of the innovation we're seeing in packaging is less functionally focused, because functionality, at least from a lot of consumers' perspective, is kind of boring. You know, we like aesthetic innovation, we like sensorial, we like consumer experience, but functionality, like the inner workings, the nitty gritty engineering of packaging,
and like just pump it out.
Exactly. You know, it's funny. It's difficult to make it a compelling point of differentiation for consumers. But when consumers use a package that is well designed and engineered, it makes a world of a difference. But it's very subliminally satisfying. Like a lot of consumers will use a package that's very well engineered and incredibly compatible with the formula, has been tested, and it just functions beautifully. And they'll enjoy using it, and they know that, but they can't tell you why. And you know, that's kind of one of the challenges when it comes to like packaging functionality, is like you don't really notice it until it's like breaking down or not working properly.
Yeah, that's very true. That is very true. That's because until this, I didn't care. I kind of just presumed it was there for a reason, you know, especially in lip products, like you say, a lip gloss, it makes sense. You're going to dip it in, product's going to rise up. Like it completely makes sense. And, you shake a product, you can kind of hear that there's some gap in there. And I think one thing we've learned from this series of videos that I do is that just because there's a lawsuit, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong or that there's a huge issue in the industry. So I think overall, the consensus is that brands aren't trying to trick you. Initially, most brands aren't trying to trick you. There's some. And even if they do, like they might have a little oopsie at the beginning, but then, with the printing and all that kind of stuff, but most brands will try and hit the right mark.
Yes, I would say most brands do try to rectify it.
Yeah.
I would say the brands, in my experience, that try to just launch as is, even if it doesn't match the fill weight printed on the package, it's oftentimes due to retail deadlines and pressure.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
So it sounds like even though underfilling is definitely something to keep an eye out for, it does absolutely happen. It maybe isn't something to be too worried about when you're shopping for beauty products. I honestly don't believe these brands are out to get us and scam us. Are we really paying for extra packaging? Maybe not so much. Do I look at these sort of things when I'm spending my own money on product? Absolutely, because, a few brands have let me down. But often there is a valid reason for why products may seem underfilled, even if it doesn't seem immediately obvious to us as consumers. And I'm always on the side of the consumer, but I don't think we're being as scammed as a lot of people lead us to believe. And although there are times where this isn't the case, it sounds like instances of brands outright trying to scam you are fairly uncommon. That said, if something is catching your eye because it looks noticeably larger than the competitor's products, maybe just have a look at the net weights and make sure you aren't being tricked, just in case. Now, just quickly, before we go, I just wanted to share a few more questions I had for Allison that kind of came up in natural conversation. They aren't about underfilling exactly, but it's not every day that you interview a beauty packaging expert, so I just wanted to get her thoughts on a few more packaging related topics like packaging misconceptions, what brands do packaging well, that sort of thing, So here we go.
The biggest packaging misconception consumers have.
I think I'm going to take this from a sustainability angle. I think a lot of consumers focus almost entirely on packaging material in regards to sustainability and environmental impact. But I think consumers and the industry as well, this happens a lot with brands. If we could shift focus to include packaging design more, I think we'd actually be making a more significant reduction. So this actually does tie back to oversized packaging. So if you make oversized packaging and you make it in a bioresin or aluminum, okay, there may be some sustainability merit to that, but we could also just reduce the amount of material used per package and we would instantly decrease the amount of carbon emissions and waste that we're generating. So it's one of the most proactive sustainability strategies is just reducing the amount of material used and focusing on really intentional lightweighted design. I think that's something that could be a lot more front and center on the sustainability conversation, and just packaging in general is design first.
Visually, what brand do you love their packaging, but that also serves a purpose? That you're looking at that looks nice, but it also makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I really like this one from a design perspective. Coco Kind, I feel like, is very underappreciated for their approach to sustainability. When you look at Coco Kind, they have a variety of glass and plastic. So I think a lot of consumers don't necessarily give them the credit that they're due, but they do a lot of lightweighting. So for example, I hope this product is still on the market, but their retinol body lotion, they came out with their retinol body lotion a few years ago, and it's in a tube, but it's a lightweighted tube. So if you look at the cap, it's significantly smaller and it's fused directly to the tube sleeve.
Yeah,
so there's a huge reduction in material use per SKU, and it increases manufacturing efficiencies once we're actually manufacturing it, because we're manufacturing essentially one fused packaging part instead of two separate ones. So that's an example of, a sustainable design that I think is really moving the needle on reducing material use and carbon emissions, but may not necessarily be the most flashy from a sustainability perspective. I think oftentimes sustainability, the most effective sustainability, sometimes is very understated, and it's hard to just visually recognize it, to the untrained eye. But one that I think is very interesting, and this is one that launched recently, is from a brand called Sonsi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Ooh, not heard of that.
Are you familiar with them?
No.
Okay, so they're a skincare brand. Pamela Anderson became the face of their brand like a few years ago.
Sorry, yes, that makes sense now.
Yeah. So they recently came out with a moisturizer that's in a PHA jar. So to the average consumer, it looks like it's just like a standard plastic jar.
Yeah.
But it's actually PHA, so it's actually compostable at end of life, both industrially and at home, which is pretty awesome. So essentially, like, PHAs are technically a plastic, but they're not derived from fossil fuels. They're derived through a fermentation process. So, you remove the fossil fuel origin story, and then you also remove the dependency on our recycling system, which here in the US is very unreliable. So you get a really, you get a really interesting and compelling sustainability story. And it's still a relatively new material, so there's a lot of innovation, and there's still a lot of kind of manufacturing kinks that are being ironed out behind the scenes. But I think it's really exciting. I'm hoping we see more of it on the horizon.
When it comes to serums, pumps or droppers?
Oh God. Okay, the most divisive packaging question.
I know.
I mean, from a convenience perspective, I do love a good pump, but traditionally pumps are mixed material, so they're not recyclable. Then again, most droppers also aren't recyclable because they're also mixed material.
Yes, true.
I mean, knowing me, I'm a klutz, so I think a pump's probably the safer option from like a personal experience.
For you personally,
yeah, for me personally, in these clumsy hands of mine, I'm gonna have to go with a pump.
I think pump too. When it comes to a dropper, I also just get confused. I know I've been doing this for so long, but I do like two drops as direct. I'm like, no, that's not enough. But just like one or two pumps. If it was just like use one or two pumps, that'd be so much easier.
That's a great point. Yeah. If you're using a pump, it's a lot easier to dose than with a pipette. Unless you have like the marcation lines of like the actual dosage that like you can potentially include in that. But okay.
Yeah.
Good to know that you're
Agreed.
on the pump team.
Thank you so much for helping me out with this. Reading these lawsuits, I'm always like, I never know whose side I'm on. I'm always like, and I never try and pick sides, but I'm also at the end of it, I'm like, I don't think the consumer's winning here again. But it's really interesting to see what actually goes on behind the scenes, kind of thing. So thank you so much. Can you tell everybody where they can find you online, please?
Yes. You can find me at Allison Turquoise. Turquoise middle name. Parents were hippies. It is what it is. But yeah, I'm on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I will, of course, link all that in the description down below.
So there we go. I hope you enjoyed having Allison on the channel today and learning a bit about how beauty packaging works behind the scenes. I will post all her social media in the description down below. Give her a follow. You are going to learn things you didn't know you needed to learn. Like, honestly, I never found packaging so interesting. Like, you think it's just bottles and cardboard. It's not. There's so much to it, so much you learn, and that will make you look at your products in a completely new light. But let me know what you think about underfilling though. Like, do you think a lot of brands are trying to trick you? Actually, no, tell me, what's the worst example of underfilling that you've ever seen? And most importantly, are you team dropper or team pump? I need to know when it comes to serums. So yes, hope you enjoyed today's video and I'll see you next time.